been 4 months since William Cogswell Jr. was elected Charleston's mayor. Today, I talk one-on-one with Mayor Cogswell about some of the projects he's working on right now for the city. For this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Charleston Mayor William Cogswell Jr. Welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Glad to be here, man. Glad to be here.
I appreciate it greatly. I know we saw each other 2 weeks ago doing the bridge run. I know you were over at the Digital Corridor for an event. I was there looking for somebody to do an event. So that was interesting. But I know since that time, Mayor, obviously you've been busy with Sumar Street, the Union Pier, of course, King Street improvements, and a couple of other things. So let me just jump right into it, Mayor. Sumar Street, the Sumar Street redevelopment. Of course, that's the North Bridge. It's the Charlestown Gateway site, which is a 2.5-acre parcel of land located at the central entrance point of West Ashley. The site was once home to, obviously, Piggly Wiggly, and after a 5-year period of vacancy, the city purchased it in 2017 for a price tag of $3 million. The Piggly Wiggly structure was demolished in 2018, leaving the property in its present state, as you know. And since that time, since the city's acquisition of this particular property, you, or the city, and obviously the community have come together to try to come up with some ideas to figure out what to do with that property. So as we sit here right now, Mayor, what is the current price tag on this redevelopment?
Well, it's a little more complicated in that we're not just looking at the city-owned parcel, which is the one that you referenced that we purchased, or the city purchased back in, I guess, 2017 or maybe even 16. My goal is to not just have that site redeveloped, but the entire 35 acres of what once was the Ashley Landing Mall repurposed. And so we've been working with the owners of the mall site, along with some other property owners in the vicinity. And I think have a potential plan that could be very exciting that would allow for some resiliency efforts, would allow for some affordable housing specific to entry-level positions at the city and on the police and fire department, which we're having a really difficult time recruiting because of affordability in our city. Also, we would have a large public space. Hopefully, I'm looking at about a 2-acre park that would be located there. And if we do it right, it would be something that would be substantially less expensive than the previous plan that was city-led, that was going to require about a $45 million investment from the city. In this case, I think a lot of the private sector would be putting the money in. We would have some control over the design and what goes there because we would control the public funds that, of course, would be used for only public improvements. So it's an involved concept, Quintin, but one that I'm really excited about and one that I think would be the transformative project that West Ashley has been looking for quite some time.
When this particular project is actually come to fruition, sorry about the background noise there, but how much money would the city put in and how much would the private sector put in for this particular project?
It's to be determined on the specifics, but if we were able to redevelop the entire 35 acres, it could be upwards of $200+ million, overwhelming majority of which privately funded. The city would probably look to do, I don't know, where in the $20+ million range. But again, for park space, for affordable housing components, and for resiliency and street improvements. So a lot less expensive than what was previously proposed, but a lot bigger bang for our buck, because that would also generate substantially more revenues, tax revenues to the city and to the TIF that can be utilized not just on that site, but down the Sam Rittenberg and Old Town Corridor, again, which have been neglected for quite some time.
So, Mayor, when it comes to affordable housing, how many affordable housing properties will be on this actual site?
In terms of units,
Yes, sir. Oh, yes,
again,
exactly right.
that's to be determined. Right
Okay.
now, there are no requirements for there to be any workforce housing units or affordable units, and so we're working with what we can use the public dollars to help, in essence, buy down some of the units, again, specifically for first-time teachers, first-time firefighters, first-time police officers, first-time city employees, and that's how we would price them. And again, it's a loose concept right now, but I have met with and discussed it with Charleston County School District Superintendent. She's excited about the prospect, again, because we're all having these incredible recruitment issues, and it's not just the city or the school district. It's businesses. I mean, the biggest issue we're facing right now, since I've come into office and really dug into the numbers, is affordable housing. I mean, it is a crisis, not just in the city of Charleston, but regionally. And it's one that we got to tackle pretty aggressively and head on.
And I want to get back to that in just a second, Mayor. But let me ask you this. When it comes to obviously that area, obviously, and you mentioned the TIF district earlier, if you put that TIF district right there, which is essentially right now going on, how long will it be before the city actually see any tax revenue from this new project?
Well, so normally what you do in a TIF is the private sector builds the public improvements, and then you reimburse them. So they're at risk to some extent. You can define what goes where through a development agreement, which is pretty common in these sort of structures. What you don't want to do is the city front a lot of money and then, hope that the private sector comes through. The responsible way to do it is let the private sector do the development based on a mutual agreement, and then when it's done and entering into the tax rolls that you can then bond off of, you then take the money and reimburse them. So again, that's the way most TIF districts have been done. It's the way I did it when I was in the private sector. So it's something I do have some experience with, and I think it could be a very well utilized plan here to help revitalize West Ashley.
Now, what will be the mutual agreement for this, and what will be the actual development agreement for this project?
Again, we got to finalize a site plan and then kind of who's paying for what. But, a TIF, the city fund would not be used for anything that would be, not in essence owned by the city. So it would be for building the park space, which we would ultimately own. It would be for resiliency efforts or stormwater mitigation or sidewalk improvements, crosswalks. You can use it, as I understand it from our legal department, to help with affordability components too. So I think we can get creative. I think we're going to need to get creative because these are, especially when it comes to affordability, it's just not easy solutions. So I'm optimistic that we can deliver something with the right team that will be very impactful for West Ashley, that will be financially responsible too, and create an incredible environment for the neighborhood.
Planning and urban landscape design would be ideal to fix the potential flooding around that area.
I'm sorry, you broke up a little bit there, Quintin. I couldn't hear.
Yes, yeah, no worries. What integrated planning and urban landscape design for this project would actually fix the flooding in that area?
So the Sumar Street is actually a pretty high piece of property, but it does, as like all stormwater, it ties into systems that are quote downhill from it. So you need to make sure what you're doing is capturing the stormwater that you're dealing with or producing on site and not flooding out your neighbors. So it's pretty involved, but not something that is by any means impossible. It just takes some real forethought to make sure that what you're doing meets the stormwater requirements that the city have, which as of since 2020 are probably some of the most stringent in the country, because we're dealing with sea level rise and the like.
That's my next point. That area, as you know, is a natural nod due to its high relative elevation, as you just mentioned, and the convergence of commercial activity. So how will the city's zoning code be rewritten to encourage and actually stand out of the way of good development?
Yeah, we're working through the whole redevelopment or rezoning rewrite now. It's in the beginning phases, and there's a potential path to going towards what's called elevation-based zoning, where you would encourage denser development on high areas or in high areas, and of course lower density, if any, development in low-lying areas, which fundamentally makes sense. There are, though, some potential unintended consequences that can occur when you just do a blanket rewrite, and particularly when it comes to affordability. So that's something that I've tasked our planning department with really studying in some detail, because you don't want to be so focused on the resiliency efforts, which are crucial and critical, and again, not paying attention to the affordability issue, which, as I mentioned earlier, is one of the biggest issues that we're facing in the near term.
I know the area very well, but where exactly is the lower density and the higher density around that area?
Well, specific to that area, we can look at it topographical maps. I mean, obviously, once you go down towards the rivers or the creeks, I mean, that's where you're going to find the lower areas. Church Creek Drainage Basin, we have what's called the Crescent, which if you move further towards Citadel Mall, that there used to be a creek that actually used to tie into, we think used to tie into Church Creek. So it's a pretty well defined. The drainage basins are pretty well defined, and actually the city, we're wrapping up or working on finalizing the citywide water plan, which will highlight each of those drainage basins, how they're interconnected. And then we're moving forward on engineering solutions to some of the existing problems, hopefully all of the existing problems, but then also designing them in a way that you can address sea level rise as it comes. So engineer it and do retrofits to a lot of the drainage system so that you can anticipate higher sea levels and higher tides that will impact those basins in years to come. So trying to plan for the future for sure, both from a civil engineering standpoint, but also from a land use standpoint. Like I say, it is very involved, and we're probably going to need to have many of these interviews as the process moves forward, because it gets pretty complicated pretty quickly, but I think we're moving in the right direction for sure.
So what are the existing problems around this soon-to-be project?
What are the existing problems
when it comes to those basins and drainage and creeks?
Well, again, if you're speaking about specific to Sumar Street, I've not seen the scopes themselves yet, but I mean, I've been told by some property owners, including the folks that own the Faison folks, is that when you have current water lines or stormwater drainage lines that are mismatched in size, that they found a garbage can in one. I mean, just stuff that are the result of it not being a major focus, 40, 50, 60 years ago, and some of these neighborhoods were developed initially. And so each kind of project was done their own way to some extent. And while they tie together, it's not always uniform, is what I'm being told. And then, of course, you have a lot of deferred maintenance that, we're having to address on a pretty regular basis. And that's been the case for the last 10 years, really. It's something that we're doing a lot of catch up.
Sir, where else is the deferred maintenance that you want to focus on in West Ashley and the other parts of the city?
Really, Quintin, it's kind of all over. I mean, there have been some initiatives that have occurred, but a lot more needs to be done. So, we're seeing, I think, some good progress in terms of what can and will be done in the DuPont and Wapu area. But again, it's a compounding issue. And so the longer we go, the more complicated it's becoming. The good news is, though, that we have entered into an agreement with the Army Corps of Engineers for doing this analysis that I was talking about and engineering solutions to problems across West Ashley and James Island and Johns Island that will also come with federal funding. Because again, it's one thing to design things, but you ultimately need to find the money to implement those plans, which is not always easy, but so you need to be ahead of it.
You're going to get that federal funding for those particular projects. So how much money does the city need to put together for that, to add to that project?
Well, just to be clear, you're not a guarantee on getting federal funding. You are eligible for federal funding, so you still need to work with our federal delegation to make sure we get our share of those infrastructure dollars. And then when it comes to local match, you make a good point. I mean, this is going to be expensive. There's no question about it. And the city of Charleston alone cannot afford even the local match. So we're going to need to work closely with the county. We're going to need to work closely with the state and other municipalities, because water knows no geopolitical boundaries. It goes across jurisdictional lines. So it is very much going to need to be a collaborative approach. And so to that end, we're doing things like on Wednesday, I got a whole bus of council members and the like that are heading up to Columbia just to help establish good relationships with the folks up there, because there are a lot of great people in Columbia. I mean, I served up there, as you know, for 3 terms in the legislature. And while there's, at times in our cities and states' history been a love-hate relationship between the Low Country and the rest of the state or Columbia, I think I want to put those days behind us, because we're all in this together and we need to work together.
I remember my first interview with you when I normally don't get sick, but I was sick that day, and I sat down, did an interview with you when you ran for State House, and here we are. You're now mayor.
That's right. That's right.
Let me go to Union Pier quickly, because this is coming from WCBD. Low Country businessman Ben Navarro has agreed to purchase Union Pier. The 70-acre property on the peninsula, which currently serves as a terminal for Carnival Cruises, is slated to be redeveloped after the South Carolina ports previously announced it would not renew the cruise line's contract for that space. I know that you outlined a vision for the property prior to the sale that included providing public access to the waterfront, adding significant green space, utilizing lower density and height restrictions for building and affordability. Let me ask you this, Mayor. When did you know that Union Pier was actually going to be sold to Ben Navarro?
Actually, to Ben, I think the day it was announced publicly, I had an understanding that there were a couple of parties that were interested. I had some conversations with Ben. It wasn't a guarantee. I said to Ben the same thing that I said to the Ports Authority, and that was those kind of conditions that you just ran through. The other two that I really pushed for in my very first meeting with the Ports Authority was that I feel very strongly that the cruise terminal itself needs to move from Union Pier. Not because I hate cruises or anything like that, but it would define in a large part what can be developed on the remaining property around it. It just would have a significant impact on it. And then the other thing that I was pretty clear with the port on, and they were receptive to, is that I felt that it should be targeted towards a local company, because I felt, and still do, a local developer, a local partner is going to be far more responsive to the needs and the wants and desires of the community versus somebody from out of state that might just look at it more transactionally. I think this is a real opportunity for our city. Like Sumar Street, I think it will be very much a beacon for who and what we're going to be in the future. And I'm really excited about the potential. I mean, there's a lot of work to be done, don't get me wrong, but I think the potential is there to have something that we can all be extremely proud of.
Mayor Cogswell, how did you consult City Council about Union Pen being sold to Mr. Navarro?
I didn't really. We don't have any say in who it was sold to or not. I've told City Council about some of the earlier conversations that I've had, but in terms of the city being involved in any sort of negotiations with potential buyers, I can put my position out there very clearly early on. Is where I stood on it, and I think it reflected a lot of what the public sentiment has been that we've learned over the past year plus, going through the low process, and hell, even going back to the 90s when it was first being contemplated, and I was, just getting started in my career. So I've followed it and have been pretty familiar with it for decades now, and as I say, very excited about the potential. Where I am asking for City Council's help and others for that matter, and I think is going to be extremely important to the caliber of redevelopment that can go there, particularly with regards to the public realm and affordability, is establishing a tax increment finance district there on Union Pier. And so we are talking about moving forward on that. I think tomorrow night at City Council, I'm asking them to approve putting the initial step forward on that process. Which will take probably 6 to 9 months to do. But it's very important for me that occur because, having that financial capacity gives you, the city, a lot of say in what goes there. So, and again, what size and scale it is dependent on how much money there is. So I think it's a very important first step, and one I hope that council will see fit to move forward with.
Now, because of Union Pier, Mayor, when will the city have to actually give up tax revenue later on down the line?
No, actually, it has a zero basis right now, and if we establish a TIF, that money can be reinvested. All of the future tax revenue will be, in essence, going to the city that can be reinvested in that area. That's the kind of outline for a TIF district. One of the concerns has been that, like with the school board participating in something like this, that it would take away from monies going to schools. Well, again, currently there's zero revenue coming into schools from that property. And the issue we have, particularly on the peninsula when it comes to schools, is not renovating them or getting them to capacity, because every school, as I understand it, on the peninsula is well below capacity. What we need on the peninsula are families to live here. What we need on the peninsula are amenities for people that live here. What we need on the peninsula is more affordability. And a TIF would allow for that to happen far more quickly than not having one.
Man, how many dwellings do you foresee on this particular project? Union Pier.
You broke up again a little bit there.
Oh, no worries. How many dwellings do you foresee for Union Pier?
How many developments?
I mean, dwellings, I'm sorry.
I don't know. I mean, I think it certainly won't be anywhere as dense as what was proposed under the low plan. But I can't say for certain. I think I've talked on a number of occasions now with Mr. Navarro and his team, and I think that they want to do the right thing. They want lower density there. They want it to be an extension of the landmark historic district that is downtown Charleston. So I'm optimistic that this is going to be a legacy project, not just for Mr. Navarro, but for the city of Charleston.
What timeline from the city, Mayor, do you all intend to commit to the taxpayers in the city now that this has been sold to Mr. Navarro?
Again, I'm hoping that we would move forward on a TIF, which would probably, just in terms of the process, take through the end of this year. We also want to work on the entitlements, the zoning for the property. And that, of course, will define a lot of how many units can go there, what type of units, what size, scale, etc. So we do have a lot of leverage between the public financing side, assuming we move forward with a TIF, and with the entitlements. But, so I think it's going to be a collaborative effort, one that I'm excited to work with the development team on, and with a lot of the advocacy groups and neighborhood associations, because, I think this is one of those things you want to get right. And it's complicated, but there's some tenets that I think we can all agree on that I'm optimistic we can come to something that works for everyone.
Now, Charleston is, as you know, Mayor, is obviously, unfortunately, sinking. As you know, it's sinking faster than any city here on the East Coast. What is the city's plan if this land becomes, unfortunately, useless because it continues to sink?
Well, I think that first and foremost, resiliency does need to be at the forefront of a lot of these planning efforts and actual implementation. So one of the things that I'm very focused on is extending the battery amenity, high battery amenity, up the east and western side of the peninsula. There was a contemplation of a wall-like structure that I was not in favor of for obvious reasons, but if you can balance form and function, I think that makes a lot of sense. And there's no better example of that than high. So if we can design something that is an amenity but also provides protection against sea level rise on Union Pier, not just Union Pier, but really around the peninsula itself, that makes a lot of sense. And so we spent a lot of time working with the Army Corps of Engineers to allow for that. And I think we're pretty close to getting there. We're not 100%, but it's something that candidly I'm going to insist on, because again, we need form and function to balance out, and high battery is a great example of doing just that.
I hate to ask this, but why isn't the city of Charleston focused on flooding first over any development?
I'm sorry, you broke up again. Why are we focusing on flooding over any development?
City of Charleston focus on flooding first over any other development. What's the point of developing properties that would just flood?
Yeah, no, I think it makes sense. We do have very stringent, as I mentioned earlier, stormwater policies that do try and address that. There's certain things that are outside of your control, again, like sea level rise. So you certainly need to make sure that that's accounted for in future uses in terms of what you're planning for and engineering solutions to flooding that you're working on, but also, as I mentioned earlier, in your land use policies. But again, what's important to balance is the affordability crisis with the resiliency crisis, and oftentimes they're at odds with one another. so, it's something that there's no easy solution, but it's something that we are working through. To some extent, it is not case by case, but some areas are better or easier to deal with than others. But it is a complicated issue that I think is going to take a lot of vetting, and we're neck deep in it right now, I can assure you.
Just where you left, Mayor, where in the city's housing plan is there to actually increase quality housing options and partnerships with the local governments to actually reduce fees for homes built to accommodate lower income residents?
To reduce fees?
Yes, to reduce fees for homes to build actually to accommodate those lower income residents.
Yeah. So again, affordable housing, workforce housing, attainable housing. There are all kinds of initiatives, and but the reality of it is, Quintin, despite a lot of valiant efforts and work by government entities, nonprofit entities, and even the private sector, we're not even coming close to addressing our housing needs and our affordability needs. So again, we need to take a much broader look at it. We need to look at it regionally, not just from the city of Charleston. We need to look at it from state legislation standpoint. I mean, there's the way the low-income housing tax credits work in the state of South Carolina, even though they've made some improvements, it's still problematic, particularly for urban environments like Charleston, to secure LIHTC credits. And then when you get into specific projects, you can run into entitlement issues, you can run into stormwater issues, you can run into all kinds of problems. But what I can tell you is this: it is something, as I think, repeated throughout this interview, I am extremely focused on, because we've got to address this head on, and there's not going to be just one solution to it. There are going to be multiple solutions, and not every solution is going to work in every situation. So we're going to get creative because we have to. And I am optimistic, though, with the community that we have, that we can lean in and really tackle this problem head on.
The city's housing supply.
I'm sorry, you broke up the first part of that.
Okay. Where is the increase in housing supply in the city?
It is not even coming close to keeping up with the demand on the, just general housing stock or on the affordable housing stock. And so it's a real issue. And of course, even when you have market rate houses that can't keep up with the supply, that makes the affordable issues all the more acute. So part of our larger solution is we need to work on supply, and that supply needs to be in the right locations, and we need to make sure that infrastructure is in place before that supply is built. So there's a lot of catching up to do, if I'm honest, but we're working through it. And like I say, I'm optimistic that we can do good things. But things like the county's half-cent sales tax extension, which will be on the ballot this November, is very critical, because that is 25 years worth of future infrastructure. And it's important that we get that right. And a lot of this, as you know, Quintin, is math, and in terms of where the development's happening, what the traffic outputs are going to be, what the engineering stormwater calculations are going to be, and where the infrastructure needs to go. So we need to bring out our calculators and start digging into the numbers, and that's something that we're doing pretty aggressively here at the city, like I say, on a variety of fronts.
And one last question for you, Mayor. I got to go back to this Post and Courier article from a couple of weeks ago, and obviously they listed, of course, the salaries of the city employees and yourself.
Yep.
going from you down to your special advisors. I looked at two of them. Why are there actually two special advisors?
That was actually how I think it was defined when we came in. And some job descriptions, particularly in city government, they don't fit neatly in heading types. So you've got, I think you're referring to Mika, perhaps Mika Gadsden and Wendell Gilliard. And it seems to have been a real favorite talking point for a lot of people in the press. But bottom line is, both of those two folks are doing incredible work. And I just had a meeting with Representative Gilliard and a longtime business owner on Upper Meeting Street, and also talked about some really creative initiatives that are going on for with regards to housing in Houston. So contemplating a potential trip for some city staff out there to look at some ideas that have been done there. And then with Mika's been pretty essential on some initiatives that don't fall neatly within a particular category. And she's been, again, as I've said, providing a voice and a perspective that I think it's very important for me to have as the mayor of this city, that has been, again, very helpful. And so, I mean, I could use 5 more special advisors, to be honest with you, but we inherited a budget and were limited in what we could do.
Back to Mr. Wendell Gilliard, why is an elected official in a creative position by a former mayor, why is that a conflict of interest?
I don't think it is. I mean, I think in the legislature, our legislature is a part-time position. It is not a full-time position. Almost everybody in the legislature, unless they're retired, has a day job. And so the Attorney General has given an opinion that people that are elected in the state legislature can work for local government. It's done on a variety of other, I think, sitting legislators. So I don't think it's a conflict at all. I think actually it's incredibly beneficial for us to have somebody that has that insight to the legislature because of how important they are to what we're able to get done on local levels.
And for a mayor of a major city such as Charleston, why are you getting paid less and your chief of staff is getting paid more?
Because, again, we inherited a budget. I'm not going to increase my salary. And, I think in today's world, it's difficult. You're competing with the private sector. And the chief of staff came with some incredible experience that if she was working in the private sector, she'd get paid more than what she's being paid at the city. And so it's just where we are. And it's the reality we're faced with. And I'm really happy to have her. I think she's been an incredible asset to the city, and enjoyed working with her.
Charleston Mayor William Cogswell Jr., thank you for your time again. Welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thanks, Quintin.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
I appreciate that.